Welcome to the Biomechanical Analysis of the Kipping Muscle Up. My name is Jessica Campbell. This is for Functional Biomechanics at A.T. Still University. First and foremost, we need to address what is a muscle up. A muscle up is a full range of motion pull-up with a transition into a dip. Momentum is produced by the kipping action. Strength, proper range of motion, safety, and efficiency are just a few of the elements that will be addressed in this presentation. A muscle up is a gymnastics skill that is basic in terms of a gymnastics-based athlete, but advanced skill for a CrossFit-based athlete or athlete utilizing it for strength and conditioning in a different sport. There are 5 main phases of the muscle up that we are going to address today. The first is the dead hang. The second is the preparatory phase, which involves both a global extension and global flexion. This pulls us into the movement phase, the first of which is the pull, which leads us into a transition and ends in a dip. The first phase, the start position. In here, there is no great movement to it. If you will look, the contraction type is very isometric in nature. The movement is in a basic flexion and extension pattern throughout the body. What we want to look at, and where we want to start this position, is we'll start looking at the grip. The grip that we're using today is a neutral grip. There's also a false grip that actually allows the athlete to bypass the wrist joint, making for a different variation of a muscle up called the strict muscle up. So with the grip, we are looking for the thumb to come around and hopefully get over at least the knuckle of the first finger, if not the middle finger as well, depending on the size of the athlete versus the size of the rings. Next is the body position. This body position is coined as global flexion, where we're having an absolute engagement throughout the body in an isometric contraction. What we'd like to focus on is on muscular engagement from the grip within the hand and wrist all the way down to where you'll see that we're even pointing our toes to help engage that posterior chain to start the movement correctly. What this muscle engagement does is it's not only for strength, but it's also for form and safety of the athlete to complete the movement pattern. The preparatory phase, or basically the kipping motion, is what we're going from is a global flexion, or in coaching cues would be a hollow rock position, to a global extension. The contraction types found within the hand and wrist are isometric in nature, while you're going to find throughout the rest of the body and related joints is concentric in nature. We're moving from an absolute flexion, or an elevation because we're looking for that upward rotation in the shoulder girdle, and extension coming through the spine, hips, and knees. Global extension is that forward swing, which in coaching terms is a Superman position. The application of Angular Kinimatics is absolutely necessary to complete this kipping action, as you're finding that there is what we're attempting to do within the kip is place the body in an optimal position to rotate about the axis by creating a lever through the shoulder joint, thus creating the optimal angle, which is perpendicular to the rings, which will lead us into the transition phase. Common faults. You're going to find the common faults here is going to be breaking opposed to bending at the specific joint. You will find that in my global extension, I break at the knees. In terms of coaching cues, you're throwing energy or wasting energy because you are not maintaining the tight global flexion to extension, which is a true kipping motion, which that motion is going to allow us to be successful through the transition. You're also going to find this break can also occur at the elbow joint, and not a lot at the hips or shoulders, but you're going to mainly find it and focus on knees and elbows for the faults. The next phase, after you move from that kip, is going to be the pull. It's initiated after the momentum is created through the kip. The pull mechanics, we're going to look only at the upper body for a moment. The arms should be maintaining, they've created that straight lever that was perpendicular to the rings. Now the arms are going to be allowed to bend at that elbow joint, and we should be pulling the rings towards the hips. The hip drive and timing, which also accounts for the angular acceleration in this example. There needs to be a violent hip drive towards the rings. So now we're changing the angular velocity with application to angular acceleration as we're shortening that period of time. This is going to create a successful transition that is coming up. Again, when we reference our contraction types, we're looking at isometric through hands and wrists as we're wanting to really work on grip strength. And the rest, again, is concentric in its contraction type. The movement is flexion, while the knees are starting to be in extension. This happens because of the elevation of the hips towards the rings. Common faults here, you'll actually see it in this picture, is you can look at the angle of pull, as I am pulling more towards my armpits versus pulling to my hips. This is going to make for a much more difficult transition and a deeper catch into the bottom of the dip. The next is one of the most important elements in terms of skill and strength, which is the transition, which truly is the element of pulling from below the rings to atop the rings. The shoulder joint becomes of utmost importance throughout this motion, as this is where torque is created. You have two different factors or elements of torque here. We have internal torque coming about the shoulder axis as we move our body around it. Then we have external torque as we are moving our body with utilization of the shoulder joint around the rings. The application of torque. You're going to see that through the kipping motion, we make our body absolutely parallel to the ground or perpendicular to the rings. At that point in time, with the use of force couples, we want to rotate or apply torque about the ring axis to end up on top of it with utilization of the shoulder joint. Common faults here, it becomes in terms of strength and timing. After that, important hip thrust, the ability to apply the amount of angular velocity and angular acceleration to sit up around the rings and catch in that bottom position. The dip, which is the catch position, it's the end of the transition, it's the bottom of the catch. In all reality, if we can get an athlete to this point, the success of the muscle up is quite near. You're going to find again that the main version of contraction type is concentric. You're going to find the movement, though, now. We've changed a little bit where we're starting to apply a couple different force couplets where we're having hands and fingers in flexion, wrists are in extension. So we have a couple different elements moving throughout this. Now, there's a mechanical advantage, and you can see the position that I'm in. My shoulders are now in front of the rings. My wrists lie right in line with my elbows. I am ready to press up through the motion. One of the biggest elements here is that now we're fighting gravity. We're hanging above the ground, so now we have additional pull from gravity as well as our body weight to press up through this motion. To have a successful repetition of a muscle up, we have to press out of the dip. We must lock out at the top where our elbows are locked, as are our shoulders. Common faults here, purely strength. I'll find some athletes can move through the transition but cannot press and lock out. There's efficiencies of a muscle up. With proper utilization of torque, momentum, angular kinematics, the athlete can complete multiple repetitions before fatigue becomes a factor. If you look at 3 high-end CrossFit athletes, you're going to find different variations of the kip. You're going to find the middle individual to be quite efficient of the 3. You'll also find the one to the right to have a hard time with breaking out the elbow before he actually kips and pulls through. So to be efficient in a kip is to be efficient at a muscle up. But what is the application to sport and fitness? It is a body weight activity that takes a large amount of strength, mobility, and skill to complete. There is strength through the shoulder girdle, as we know that the shoulder joint is the most athletic joint within our body. So to create a joint that is stable and strong, and complete it with a body weight activity, allows the athlete to work and challenge themselves without having to have barbells or weights in their hands. We also have to have great mobility about that shoulder joint in order to complete it. So we get a great range of motion for that athlete and demand put on that joint as well, which under proper guidance becomes an excellent form of strength. It takes the skill to be able to apply a violent hip thrust, which we know the importance of explosive hips throughout the power-based sports, but also the timing and application to rotate about a mobile access with the rings. My prerequisite in upper body strength is 3 strict pull-ups and 3 strict dips. This is for safety measures. My athlete must be able to do that before I allow them to even attempt one. In conclusion, high-level CrossFit athletes, this is a skill, but is a basic gymnastics skill. This is also a great strength and conditioning bodyweight activity for an athlete in a power-based sport. Success requires both strength and mobility with the application to torque and angular kinematics. Thank you for the time, taking the time to listen and watch this video. I look forward to any and all feedback.